Alright, this is a game I played a few years ago on the internet against an international master, and I was playing with white pieces and I ended up in this difficult position for white. It's black's turn, and he wants to attack all these weak white pawns that is really hard for white to protect. So white's probably losing in this position, but this game shows that sometimes even though the position is lost, we can still create counter chances and make life more difficult for the opponent. So black here played bishop to f1 and attacks. This attacks the pawns. I really have no way of protecting them, so I have to at least try to exchange some of them and or make white's pawn structure, make black's pawn structure worse. So I go h4. There's really nothing else. Black took this pawn, and they took on g5. There's really nothing better. Here black had the choice. He could either take on f3, or he could start to push the pawn, and it seemed to black, I guess, that pushing the h pawn is just going to win immediately because it's really hard for white to stop the pawn. So if he just took on f3 here, there's just nothing I can do really, because the pawns are going to start running, both of them. But he made a mistake and he pushed the h pawn, and this really gives me a chance to stir some really interesting complications. So first I put the pawn under attack, so I'm hoping for something like h3, and then I can hit the pawn, and I'm gonna also block the h pawn from advancing. So of course it's not so simple, and black decides to protect the pawn. So he goes king 5. If he went king to g5, then I could play bishop e7 there, and I would attack the f pawn again. And similarly, white's idea of stopping the h pawn here is working reasonably well. Say king g4, bishop goes here. And white's plan here is very simple. He will sacrifice the bishop for h pawn, and then he's gonna exchange the c pawn. So h2, exchange. Now there's nothing that can stop me from playing b5 with a draw. So king f5 is reasonable, and here if I just decide to try to distract the king from protecting the f pawn by pushing the g pawn, then black would be able to block the pawn with the bishop. So say pawn to g6, bishop f3, g7, bishop d5, and now the bishop is blocking the g pawn, and black's h pawn is running. So instead what I played in the game before pushing the g pawn was pawn to d5. This is a bit of an odd move because it just sacrifices the pawn for nothing, but it creates an interesting chance. It basically blocks the d5 square from the black bishop, and that makes things more complicated for black. So I play d5, and we'll see the idea that if now, say he tries to take, which was still better, now I can go g6, and he can no longer play bishop to f3, because then the pawn is just gonna queen. He can't go bishop d5. So he then has to go king g6. I can take on f4, and this position does require some precision from black. He has to be very careful to win this position with 2 pawns against 1. Yeah, at this point I believe it's still winning, but it was not trivial, and this was definitely his best chance and my best chance. In the game, instead, after d5, the sacrifice confused my opponent a little bit, I believe. So instead, he just took on f3, and after bishop f4, black has some winning chances, but it's not clear if he's winning if he takes the bishop. Go d6, so now there are 2 pawns running, and even though white's down a piece, he's gonna get a queen. Now the second pawn runs, and white gets the queen first. He's still down a piece, but this position is very unclear, because it's unclear if black can win this or not, because his king is exposed and there's very little material left on the board, and there's a lot of room for all kinds of checks. Still, this was probably the best chance for black. In the game he took on d5, and now this position, in this position black only has 1 passed pawn, really. He only has the h pawn. The c pawn is not really a passed pawn, so it should be easier for me to sacrifice the bishop for the h pawn. I have to give up the g pawn, but here the idea is very simple for white to come to c5 and then push the b pawn, exchanging the pawn on the queen side, and the bishop will be sacrificed for the pawn on h2. So king g4, king b4, the bishop retreats, he's transferred to e8 so that now he can prevent b5, but the bishop there is not very stable, so this is enough for me to make a draw. So bishop b5, now I'm just harassing this bishop. All I want to do is just trade off this c pawn. So bishop h5, f3. He transferred the bishop over here again to protect the c pawn, but now I'm just going to play b4, b5 anyway. So he can't really gain anything by moving the bishop around, and here we agreed to a draw. So this game shows that in lost positions, and objectively this position is still lost, because black has two passed pawns against 1 of mine in the end of this variation. But still, by playing a move like d5, I'm eliminating the simplest winning plan that white had, that black had after g6, bishop f3. I eliminate this winning plan and I create more complications for him, exploiting at the same time the drawing chances in the endgames with bishops of opposite color. So by creating these kind of complications, by making opponent think about different options, trying to solve tactical problems, time trouble, sometimes this works, and it can bring results like in this game, where this unusual sacrifice, the goal of which is just to block the d5 square from the bishop, it gave a good result, and I was able to make a draw. This was one of the more interesting games I played myself with the bishops of opposite color. I studied this type of positions quite a bit in Dvoretsky's books, and it was interesting for me to play myself an endgame where these kind of ideas are put into practice. The idea is that blocking a bishop from a useful backend is more important than having an extra pawn, and the pawn on d4 doesn't really do much, except for it can be sacrificed on d5 so that the bishop doesn't have access to the square.